Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. It all began on an evening that seemed so ordinary, yet ended up changing everything. Imagine a quiet house, the kind where you can hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The woman at the center of the story thought she had her life figured out, married, comfortable, and settled. She had built her world around loyalty and trust. But sometimes, life doesn't follow the path we plan. Sometimes, emotions sneak up in places we never expect, and suddenly, we're standing at the edge of a choice we never thought we'd make. Her husband was hardworking, always away for long shifts, trying to provide the best for his family. And then there was his son, a grown man in his early 20s, polite, respectful, and someone she had always treated with a kind of guarded warmth. Over time, small conversations turned into longer ones, shared laughs turned into lingering looks, and what began as innocent familiarity slowly grew into something more dangerous. It's those quiet moments, the ones nobody talks about, that often plant the seeds of temptation. She tried to ignore it, of course. She told herself it was just a trick of her imagination, a passing feeling that would fade. But feelings have a way of demanding attention. And the more she resisted, the stronger the pull became. The energy between them wasn't spoken out loud, but it was there, alive and undeniable. She felt herself torn between what was right and what her heart was whispering to her in the shadows of those late nights. On that particular day, the air in the house felt heavier than usual. They were alone, the silence wrapping around them like a secret they both knew but hadn't yet confessed. One step closer, one soft touch, and suddenly the world outside faded. For a moment, it felt like nothing else existed, just the two of them caught in a moment they couldn't undo. Every breath felt like fire, every heartbeat louder than the last. But just as quickly as passion took over, reality knocked, literally. The sound of knuckles against the door jolted them both back to the world they had forgotten. It wasn't just anyone. It was the stepson's knock, sharp and unexpected. In that instant, everything froze. Hearts raced, eyes widened, and the weight of what they were doing came crashing down. What would happen if the door opened? What would be revealed if even 1 second of delay gave away too much? That moment of suspense became a turning point. Secrets had a way of slipping out, and she knew that this knock might very well be the sound of her life unraveling. Now, before I continue, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe love can ever justify crossing the line? Or is temptation always a choice we regret in the end? Let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to hear how you see it. And if you've ever been in a situation where desire clashed with loyalty, would you risk it all, or would you walk away? The knock on the door lingered in her mind long after the sound faded. Even when the silence returned, it was no longer the same silence. It carried weight, a reminder of how close they were to being discovered. Her heart was still racing, and though she tried to catch her breath, the tension in the air only grew heavier. She looked at him, and in his eyes she saw the same mix of fear and longing that she felt inside. Nothing had been spoken aloud, but in that moment, they both understood how close they were to stepping into a place from which there would be no return. To understand how they had reached that fragile point, you have to look at the days leading up to it. Life in their home had always seemed stable from the outside. Her husband was devoted, a man who worked late hours, sometimes overnight, to make sure the bills were paid and the family had everything they needed. But his absence had created a space, an emptiness that no one spoke about. And in that space, new emotions had slowly taken root. The stepson wasn't a stranger to her. She had known him since his late teens, watched him grow into adulthood. Over time, their conversations became less about daily routines and more about thoughts, feelings, and dreams. He had a way of listening to her, really listening, in a way she hadn't felt in years. When she spoke about her worries or her loneliness, he didn't brush it aside. He held on to her words like they mattered. That kind of attention is rare, and when you feel it, it can be impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the words either. It was the way his presence filled the house when her husband was gone, the way his laughter softened the quiet evenings, the way his eyes seemed to stay on her a second too long. At first, she told herself she was imagining it. But deep down, she knew she wasn't. There was something between them, growing stronger with every passing day, something neither of them wanted to admit out loud. The moment before the knock had been the clearest sign yet of how far things had gone. A simple glance turned into a closeness that neither one of them tried to stop. Their hearts had given in to something their minds knew was dangerous. And then came the knock, like fate reminding them of the thin line they were crossing. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the dark, listening to the steady sound of her husband's breathing beside her, and all she could think about was the tension that still lingered in her chest. The knock, the closeness, the unspoken feelings, all of it replayed in her mind like a secret she couldn't push away. She asked herself over and over, was this the beginning of something I can't control? Or was it just a moment that needed to be forgotten? But the truth was, she didn't want to forget. The danger of it made it even harder to resist. And though she tried to convince herself that nothing more would happen, she already knew it was too late. The following days after that knock on the door felt different, almost unreal. The house looked the same, the routines were the same, but inside her, everything had shifted. Every glance now carried meaning. Every word exchanged seemed layered with something deeper. She tried to distract herself with chores, with cooking, with the small things that usually filled her day, but her mind always drifted back to that moment. The memory of it was like a whisper in her ear, reminding her of what almost happened and what still could. Her husband remained busy, often away for work, and when he was home, exhaustion kept him distant. She wanted to reach for him, to bridge the gap that had slowly grown between them, but it was like trying to catch smoke. He was there physically, but his mind was always elsewhere. She knew he loved her, but love alone sometimes isn't enough when life keeps pulling people in opposite directions. And into that gap stepped his son, unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, filling spaces she didn't want to admit were empty. There was also the guilt. It pressed down on her in quiet moments, when she was alone in the shower or staring at her reflection in the mirror. She would ask herself, how did I let things get this far? Yet, even as she questioned herself, she couldn't deny the thrill that came with it. That mix of fear and desire was unlike anything she had felt in years, and it was addictive in a way she couldn't fully explain. One evening, she overheard a phone call. The stepson was speaking in a low voice, pacing in his room, and though she couldn't make out every word, she caught enough to sense frustration, maybe even jealousy. It struck her then, she wasn't the only one carrying this weight. He was struggling too. That realization made the bond between them even stronger, because now it wasn't just her secret, it was theirs. A shared silence that neither of them could break, yet neither wanted to let go. The conflict grew more complicated when her best friend came to visit one afternoon. Over coffee, her friend casually mentioned noticing the way the stepson looked at her. The comment was light-hearted, almost teasing, but it sent a chill down her spine. Had it been that obvious? If someone on the outside could see it, how much longer before her husband noticed? That fear gnawed at her, but alongside it, a dangerous thought lingered. Maybe she wanted to be noticed, maybe some part of her longed for the truth to come out, if only to stop the pretending. The tension in the house was now unspoken but undeniable. A brush of his hand when passing a plate at dinner, a glance held too long in the hallway, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Every small interaction carried the weight of what they were both refusing to say out loud. Late at night, lying awake beside her husband, she wondered what direction her life was moving in. Was she standing on the edge of ruin, or on the brink of a love she had been missing all along? The line between right and wrong blurred more with each passing day, and the suspense of not knowing what would happen next left her restless. The pressure inside the house had become impossible to ignore. Every day felt like walking across a tightrope, knowing one wrong step could send everything crashing down. She moved through her routines carefully, but the smallest moments carried the heaviest weight. A simple look across the dinner table, a quiet exchange of words when no one else was around, even the way his footsteps echoed in the hallway at night, it all made her heart race with a mix of fear and longing. Her husband remained blind to the storm swirling right under his roof, or maybe he just didn't want to see it. He came home later than ever, often falling asleep on the couch with work papers still in his hand. She tried to focus on him, to remind herself of the vows she had made, but her mind betrayed her every time. It drifted back to the one person she knew she shouldn't think about, yet couldn't stop. The stepson had changed too. He grew quieter, his words fewer, but his presence more intense. When he looked at her, it was no longer a passing glance, it was a steady gaze that made her feel exposed and understood all at once. She caught herself holding her breath when he walked into a room, wondering if he felt the same heaviness she did. Their secret connection had turned the air electric, and every moment carried the question of when, not if, something would give way. One evening, the tension reached its sharpest point. Rain hammered against the windows, and the storm outside mirrored the one inside her chest. Her husband had called to say he'd be working overnight, leaving the house quiet except for the steady drum of rain and the distant roll of thunder. The silence between her and the stepson was thick, almost unbearable. Words hovered on the edge of being spoken, but neither dared to break the fragile wall holding everything back. Then came the sound again, knocking. But this time, it wasn't the polite tap of a visitor. It was louder, sharper, and it rattled her nerves. She froze, her heart slamming against her ribs as she exchanged a glance with him. Had someone seen something? Was this the moment everything would come spilling out? The knock came again, insistent, refusing to be ignored. Inside her, panic and desire twisted together in a way that left her breathless. She didn't know if the danger was outside the door or sitting right there in front of her. All she knew was that something was about to break, and when it did, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, sharper, almost urgent, as if whoever was on the other side of the door already knew something was wrong. Her pulse quickened, and she felt the weight of all her choices pressing down on her shoulders. She glanced at him, and in that fleeting look, she saw the same fear mirrored in his eyes. It wasn't just about being caught, it was about the possibility that their unspoken secret had already slipped into the open. When she finally gathered the courage to open the door, it wasn't a neighbor or a stranger standing there. It was her best friend, the same one who had joked weeks earlier about the way her stepson looked at her. She stood in the doorway drenched from the storm, her expression unreadable. The friend's eyes darted from her face to the stepson in the background, and for a second, the silence spoke louder than words. The tension in the room tightened, as though every hidden truth was teetering on the edge of exposure. The unexpected visit wasn't casual. Her friend claimed she needed a place to wait out the storm, but there was something in her tone, something probing, something suspicious. Every casual question carried weight. Every glance felt like it lingered too long. The woman felt her chest tighten with unease. Did her friend already know too much? Or was this simply her own guilt painting suspicion on every move? As the rain continued to beat against the windows, the three of them shared the space uncomfortably. The stepson kept to himself, quiet but watchful, while her friend seemed determined to study every interaction. It felt like a test, and every word, every look, could tip the balance toward discovery. For the first time, the danger didn't just come from within her own heart. It stood right in front of her, disguised as friendship. Later that evening, when her friend finally dozed off on the couch, she found herself alone with him again. The storm outside had slowed, but inside, the storm raged stronger than ever. Their eyes met across the dimly lit room, and in that moment, it was impossible to ignore the unspoken bond between them. It was dangerous, reckless, but undeniably real. They both knew the risk had grown higher. It was no longer just about them, it was about the people around them who were beginning to notice. The plot twist deepened the conflict in ways she hadn't expected. Now, she wasn't only fighting against her own desires, she was battling the possibility of betrayal from someone she had trusted for years. If her friend suspected something, how long before her husband found out? The walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing moment, the weight of secrecy suffocating her more than ever. Her thoughts spiraled late into the night, torn between loyalty, desire, and the fear of losing everything she had built. The knock at the door had shifted the entire balance of her world, and now the stakes were higher than ever. It was no longer a matter of temptation, it was survival. One wrong move, one careless moment, and the truth could shatter lives beyond repair. The weight of the secret could no longer be carried. The night after her friend's visit, the air in the house was thick with unease. She could feel it in every corner, every quiet pause, every unspoken word. The guilt had grown too heavy, and the fear of discovery gnawed at her with every passing second. She had tried to keep the line between her heart and her choices intact, but it was already blurred beyond recognition. Something had to give. It happened during dinner. Her husband was finally home, looking more worn down than ever, but determined to sit at the table with his family. She tried to focus on the meal, but the silence was unbearable. Her friend's visit lingered in her mind, her stepson's watchful gaze across the table, and the secret that seemed to hum beneath the surface of every breath she took. Then her husband looked up at her and asked the simplest question, "Is everything okay?" The sincerity in his eyes broke her. She couldn't lie anymore. Her voice trembled as she admitted the truth, not in every detail, but enough. Enough for her husband to understand that the loyalty he had trusted so deeply had been crossed. The room fell silent, and the world seemed to stop. The stepson froze, his face pale, caught between anger, guilt, and something unspoken. Her husband didn't yell, didn't slam his fists on the table. Instead, he stood slowly, the disappointment in his eyes cutting deeper than any words could. But then came the twist. Her friend had already told him. That night when she had stayed through the storm, she had noticed too much, and before leaving, she had called him. He had come home knowing, sitting at that table not as a clueless man, but as someone waiting to see if the truth would come from her lips. The weight of betrayal wasn't just about what had happened, it was about how long she had chosen to hide it. The climax was painful, raw, and final. Her husband turned to his son with a look that mixed fury with heartbreak. The stepson lowered his head, unable to meet his father's gaze. In that moment, everything they had tried to keep hidden was shattered in the open. What had once been thrilling now lay exposed, fragile and destructive. Yet, in the middle of that storm, the unexpected twist struck again. Instead of leaving her immediately, her husband quietly said he wanted time to decide what came next. He didn't walk out, didn't slam the door. He simply left the table, leaving her and the stepson in silence, knowing their choices had changed everything forever. The silence that followed the truth was heavier than any storm. The house didn't feel the same anymore. Walls that once held laughter now carried the echo of disappointment. Days passed with her husband speaking little, his face unreadable, his actions distant yet calm. She lived on edge, waiting for the moment he would decide whether to forgive or to walk away. Every sound, every small gesture, felt like a signal, but he gave her none. That silence became its own kind of punishment. The stepson kept his distance too, no longer meeting her eyes, no longer sharing the lingering glances that once carried so much unspoken meaning. Whatever had lived between them had burned too bright and too fast, and now, in the aftermath, there was only the sharp ache of regret. He carried himself with guilt, aware that the bond with his father had been fractured, perhaps beyond repair. Her best friend, the one who had unknowingly pushed everything to the surface, stopped calling. She knew the truth had changed their friendship too. Secrets have a way of not just breaking trust in a marriage, but also eroding every connection around it. She found herself more alone than ever, reflecting on the choices that had led her to this point. In time, her husband finally spoke. He told her he wasn't leaving, not yet, but things couldn't continue the way they had. Trust, once broken, couldn't be glued back together in a single moment. It would take years, if ever. He wanted distance, clarity, a chance to see if forgiveness was even possible. His words weren't cruel, but they cut all the same. She realized then that forgiveness is not a gift you can demand, it's something that has to be earned, if it comes at all. The resolution didn't come with a dramatic ending, but with quiet acceptance. The romance that had tempted her so strongly was gone, leaving her with the reality of what mattered most: family, honesty, and the cost of betraying both. She knew there would always be whispers in her memory of what almost was, but she also knew that some desires aren't meant to be followed. The lesson lingered long after. The line between love and temptation is thin, but crossing it can change everything. Sometimes what feels like passion in the moment becomes regret in the light of day. And sometimes the greatest test of love isn't in what we feel, but in what we choose not to do. What about you? Do you believe trust can ever fully return after betrayal, or once broken, is it gone forever? Let me know in the comments, and tell me if you'd like to see a sequel to this story exploring what happens years later. Your thoughts might shape the next chapter. Summary: a woman caught between loyalty and temptation finds herself torn when her connection with her stepson grows dangerously close. What begins as unspoken glances spirals into a moment of passion interrupted by fate. When secrets are revealed, trust is shattered, friendships are tested, and love itself is put on trial. The story explores romance, betrayal, and the high cost of desire, leaving a powerful reflection on choices and consequences.